President Trump is tweeting about his decision to call off military strikes on Iran. He tweeted the military was ready to retaliate last night on 3 different sites. The planes were already in the air, but he decided the human cost was too high.
The president also said he felt the strike wasn't proportionate to shooting down an unmanned U.S. drone. It's not clear why these questions were not addressed before the mission was launched. The president added that Iran was hit with more sanctions last night. Charlie D'Agata is in the United Arab Emirates.
Iran remains defiant, once again insisting that they have irrefutable evidence that that drone crossed over into their airspace. And these images just released from state TV showing a Revolutionary Guard surveying jagged pieces of metal said to be debris from the drone recovered from their own territorial waters. That's important. There are also reports quoting Iranian officials that President Trump gave a warning overnight via a third country that an attack on Iran was imminent. However, an Iranian official tells CBS News that communication never took place. Now, the downing of the drone and possible retaliation has prompted the FAA to ban all U.S. airlines over some Iranian airspace, a move that has since been followed by half a dozen international carriers and counting. Now, as for the possibility of talks, Iran's UN ambassador is quoted as saying, "You cannot negotiate with someone who has a knife in their hand and is holding that knife to your throat." Anne-Marie and Vlad?
All right, Charlie, thank you very much. For more on this, let's bring in McClatchy National Military and Veterans reporter Tara Copp. She is with us from Washington. So, Tara, let's talk about the president's tweets. He says the strike intended to target 3 sites. But the way that the tweet is worded, it almost sounds as the sites were targeted, the planes are in the air. Then I asked, which is what it says, I asked, how many will die? 150 people, sir, was the answer from a general. In other words, you would think a military strike of this nature, would the president, the commander-in-chief, would be briefed on all aspects of the strike, including potential casualties.
Well, this was a very fluid and tense day at the Pentagon, and even as late as 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, there was a lot of uncertainty at the Pentagon as to what was going to take place. This morning, I was able to go over there and confirm independently that, yes, a strike had been planned and had been called off. But as far as the president now revealing that there were 3 sites, we suspected that the surface-to-air missile sites and missile batteries would be hit. That could account for the 150 personnel, but it wouldn't have been a proportional retaliation. You know, the unmanned drone, the surveillance drone that was hit, was expensive, but it was unmanned. And to avoid escalation, I think you're seeing a lot of hesitancy on both the side of Iran and the U.S. to get into a direct conflict with each other, which is exactly what this would have led us to.
Tara, just to clarify, though, in your time covering the Pentagon and national security issues, are you aware of a briefing that would be given to the commander-in-chief before military action is taken where the commander-in-chief would not be told of potential casualties?
No, I think that would always be part of the conversation, but this conversation was happening and evolving all day, so this latest option might have been the last to be briefed. You know, you had senior officers both at the Pentagon and the White House, and you had congressional leaders discussing options all day long. So, you know, the president has tweeted that he just learned that that would be the casualties, but it's also a tweet and may not be reflective of the all-day long conversations that were going on.
Got it.
So then I have to wonder, though, because, you know, he does say it was approved of 10 minutes before the missile was scheduled to be launched. He called it off. And it wasn't because, oh, the weather was really bad or Iran did something that sort of made us change our mind. Nothing about the situation changed. The number of people who were going to die, that would have been the same number, you know, when they initially floated this idea. I wonder what it says about the policy, U.S. policy in Iran, or at least the impression that it gives of U.S. policy in the region.
Sure, that's a really good point. And you saw the president broadcasting this all day yesterday, giving Iran a potential out. Was it a mistake? Was it, you know, a lone officer acting rogue? Was this not the act of the regime? Was this just purely IRGC? You saw the hesitancy broadcast from the president to get engaged in a direct conflict. So while there has been all of this blustery talk, and while the White House has pulled out of the JICPOA, and he's also created the space to maybe de-escalate this potential conflict and maybe find some more room on the negotiating table.
And Tara, sources tell CBS News concerns from U.S. allies were at least one factor behind the president's decision to not launch the strike. We spoke to Margaret Brennan earlier today. She's our chief foreign affairs correspondent in addition to a host of Face the Nation. And she talked about this impression that allies in the region have when it comes to the United States, and that is they don't have one because we don't offer up a coherent strategy, geopolitical strategy in the region. Decisions are made, seemingly snap decisions are made, decisions to carry out strikes, decisions to call them off. Is that what you're hearing and reporting from our allies as well?
And also, I should say, you know, the president often tweets or says something, and there's different messaging coming from the State Department or other,
or from the Pentagon.
Or the Pentagon, yeah.
Sure. So if you think about the sensitivity of the region, you know, Al Dhafra Air Base, where it's likely this downed surveillance plane came from, is home to scores of U.S. warplanes, tankers, surveillance jets in the UAE. The UAE is very much involved in this. It's basically the next door neighbor across the strait of Iran. And if this further escalates, it puts more of UAE at risk. Those are considerations the U.S. has to take into and think about as it has one of its best partners and allies in the region maybe get dragged into this along with it.
So we also know when you talk about this region, you're not just talking about, you know, what's happening, like you mentioned, between Iran and the U.S. We know that Russia and Iran have worked together in places like Syria. As militias support the Syrian regime, does Russia have an impact on the situation at all?
Russia absolutely has an impact on this situation. One of the things that hasn't been as widely reported is that while this, you know, intense moment is going on in the strait, there were perhaps proxy forces, Iranian-backed forces, we're not quite sure, that fired rockets at a U.S. base in Iraq. So there's all sorts of activity still going on outside of this little pinpoint, like as far as in Iraq, where soldiers are still just as much at risk as that drone was. In Syria, where Russia is still backing forces for the Syrian regime. This is not just Iran versus the U.S. This is a much more complicated scenario.
All right, Tara Copp, thank you very much.
Thank you.